All of the end portals on Lifesteal were destroyed, meaning no one could go to the end. But after 4 months, I found a way to make chunk regeneration work on the server and bring back an end portal. So this is exactly how I did it. Chunk regeneration used to be easy. Just fill up a chunk with loads of data, leave the area, and when you come back, the chunk has completely regenerated. But then 1.20.5 was released. Chunk regeneration stopped working, and nobody really knew why. But with the motivation of getting to the end on Lifesteal, I wanted to work out how to bring it back. So I tested around for a while, asked for advice in the discontinued features Discord, and got nowhere. Until I noticed this in the 1.20.5 patch notes. The game now requires Java 21. Minecraft didn't patch chunk regeneration, it just got harder because they upgraded the Java version that you had to use. So I loaded Minecraft in 1.20.4 in Java 17, and chunk regeneration worked. Then I tried the same version using Java 21, and bam, it didn't work. I then continued trying things in this version and eventually worked out that if you overload the game's memory in the overworld, then go to the nether and overload it there, go back to the overworld and save and exit, upon returning, the chunk in the nether will be reset. And if you do it the opposite way around, so overload the data in the nether, then trigger out of memory in the overworld and head back to the nether and save and quit. And once loaded back in, we can head through this portal and this chunk has regenerated. I thought I'd made great progress. I thought I'd easily be able to do it on Lifesteal, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Firstly, I need to do this on a server. But on a server, if you have loads of high data books in your inventory, then you book ban yourself. And you literally cannot join the server. You're locked out for life. So you have to manually add the books much more slowly by throwing them into a hopper to avoid that. And if you're wondering, this is called the book trolling mod, and it's what allows me to have loads and loads of pages of random characters instantly. And if I go like that, it'll throw it straight in. I don't have any of the worlds saved, but I basically had a setup like this that was much, much bigger, and I would stand here and just endlessly throw book and quills in until I got an out of memory error, which would happen when loads and loads of these chests were full. I then had this set up in the nether and triggered out of memory there too, and when I stopped the server and restarted it back up, I'd then get a successful chunk regen. And so this is where this world comes in, because I started to refine the setup and make it a bit better. This was the first prototype. Basically, you've got loads of books, loads of feathers, and loads of ink sacs, and they all go into auto crafters, which make book and quills, which supply me in here. I'd be wearing leather boots so I could stand here, and I'd throw the book and quills through the powdered snow, and it would go into the big storage. I used powdered snow because if something went wrong and I missed the hopper for some reason, I could accidentally pick up the books and book ban myself. But by using powdered snow, even if well, there's nothing to miss basically, the only place I could go is down. I then refined the setup so that the entire storage was in one chunk. And getting a successful regen was very, very easy. You flick this lever, you start getting loads of books, and we block ourselves in with obsidian. Then to save me the effort of manually making all the books, I created a macro that would automatically make them for me. That way I could kind of do other stuff whilst running tests. Also, to get to this point that you see right now, and the method I showed earlier where I was just throwing them into hoppers without the powdered snow, there was a lot of experiments, a lot of tests, like, I don't know, 50, 60 hours of failed tests, I feel like, or something like that. And as this was happening, I'd constantly be watching the memory chart on the left, because that's ultimately how you trigger out of memory. And after about 10 minutes of doing this on a 2 GB server, I'd get out of memory. As you can see, failed to store chunk, failed to save chunk, all of that good stuff. So from there, I'd keep adding books for another 5 to 10 minutes, which would keep throwing out of memory errors every time the server tried to save the game. Alright, a good 10 minutes have passed. So then what I would do is leave this bit, I can turn that machine off, and I have some hoppers here that are just constantly transporting items in and around the chunk, and this is going to make the game constantly keep saving this chunk because the chunk keeps changing. And I also right here have a chunk loader, which is going to keep that chunk loaded. The other thing to note is I made sure that my player was stood in a different chunk to the one that's getting regenerated, because if I got kicked for some reason, it'd be really hard to log back in. If I'm in that chunk, it would take ages. But in this one, it would be much quicker. So from there, I'd head to the nether, and I'd have the same setup. Also, as you can see on the left, out of memory is still occurring, even though I'm not adding books anymore, because the chunk is still trying to save and it can't. So then, we flick this lever, we head into here, and we just keep doing the same thing again. Out of memory keeps happening in the overworld chunk, and at the moment it's able to save this nether chunk because it is the -1, -3 one at the bottom of the screen there. And there we have it. We've just had out of memory and failed to save chunk for the nether chunk at -1, -3 as well. So we're now getting all these out-of-memory saving errors in the nether and also in the overworld. That's the overworld chunk. So at this point, I need to just keep adding even more books to overload the nether chunks. But look what we're getting here. We just got a lag spike. So yeah, the nether's memory needs to be overloaded even more. And I know this is a lag spike because the books aren't going into my inventory. If this is over 60 seconds, the chunk is going to crash. Okay, well, we got to disconnect. I don't know what that was about. I think I just timed out, but let's have a look. Nope, it's a crash. Okay. And interestingly, once you get out of memory in the nether, that's what you want. You want all of this to happen. You either stop the server manually or you just keep making books and it crashes itself. So as it's crashed and it's trying to save all the chunks, it's giving all of these various errors. And when we start the server back up, this is the error we want. Fail to read chunk. Because that chunk loader is running before the player's even logged on, the game's tried to load the chunk, it's failed to read it, and if you get failed to read, that means it's then failed to load, failed to bulk scan, and ultimately, when I join the server, the nether chunk is fine. That's still there, that's not regenerated. But when I head to the overworld, as you can see, it's gone. The chunk has completely regened. And once I worked this out, I thought, that's it. We're done. We're just going to scale it up to 32 gigabytes. And it'll work perfectly. So I tested this on a 4 gigabyte server and it worked. An 8 gigabyte server, no problem. 16 gigabyte, mission accomplished. And the only difference every time is that it just required more and more and more books to be added to the storage system, which meant every attempt took longer and longer. And at this point you might be thinking, why did you do this? Or why did you not do this? Loads and loads of questions, no doubt. But everything I've done, there's probably a reason for it. I can't explain it all in one video. But anyway, as you know, Lifesteal is a 32 gigabyte server, so the next progression was to tackle it on a server with 32 gigabytes of RAM. So I started the experiment, and at this speed, to get all of the books in one dimension to trigger out of memory, it would take 12 hours. Then I'd need to switch to the nether and do the same thing again. Yeah, each experiment was going to take forever. And unfortunately, this is where I started to come into an issue. As you can see from this graph, as the memory rises, Java regularly sifts through it and offloads any memory that's unused, which is why it keeps dropping back down. And this is called garbage collection. But if you fill up 32 gigabytes of RAM with loads and loads of books, it will still try to sift through everything, and that will cause a lag spike. For me to actually show this in action, it would take me 12 hours. And honestly, I ain't got that long to make this explanation. But as you can see from this log from one of my experiments, a single server tick took 60 seconds. And if that happens, the server watchdog assumes it's crashed and closes the server down. Also, ignore these out of memory errors here. These are the wrong kind of ones. This is what you get when there's more than 2 gigabyte of data in a chunk, which allows you to do chunk save stating, but it's not the out of memory error you need for chunk regeneration. They're two different things, so don't get that mixed up. But yeah, if you fill up the memory of a 32 gigabyte server, it'll probably crash before giving an out of memory error. Now, if that happened and the server crashed, for reasons I'm not going to explain, I'd have to restart the entire 12-hour experiment again. Are you starting to see why this took me 4 months to do? Again, I don't have the footage for this, but eventually I got a successful regen on 32 gigabytes. Basically, I got as close as I dared to crashing the server there. Then I went to the nether, filled up the memory here, got out of memory, got a crash, and it was a bit of luck, but it did regenerate the chunk on 32 gigabytes, which was all I needed, because then I knew it was possible, even if it was going to be a bit of a nightmare. The only issue is, this server you see right here is run on my PC. It's a local server. So it ran on Windows, and the processor had 32 cores, which is actually kind of significant, because Lifesteal runs on an Apex hosting server. Man, I should have gone to sponsor this video. I know this because last season when Lifesteal was down, it was because Apex hosting was down. So I got a 32 gigabyte Apex hosting server, which I've put this world on, and day after day I ran tests, each one taking 12 hours. And all I got every day was crashes. I even left my laptop running tests overnight too. I believe this is because Apex hosting server CPUs only have access to 4 cores, not 32. So I tried to optimize things, reduce lag. I tried sending books through portals. I tried adding the books more slowly. I tried spreading the storage out over many chunks. Everything I tried led to the same outcome of the server crashing and not producing the out-of-memory error I needed. I was pretty defeated, and I began to think that maybe it was impossible on an Apex hosting server, so I did nothing for 2 months. But during that time, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, what if? What if it is possible? Surely there's some way. It would be one of the biggest moments of the season, and it would be one of my biggest achievements in Minecraft ever. Plus, by this point, I'd already sunk hundreds of hours into the project, so surely there has to be a way. So I reached out to a YouTuber called Azirod. He'd done various research on chunk regeneration and chunk save stating, and whilst he'd said that chunk regeneration doesn't work anymore, I figured he'd have some knowledge about how books and Minecraft's memory works. He explained that you can actually fill Minecraft's RAM with books that are the same character. You'd need a lot more of them, but because they're the same, they'd hopefully cause less lag. So I added loads of books of the same character in a chunk far, far away, as you can see. And it was loaded using an Ender Pearl chunk loader. I filled 400 chests in each chunk, and I did this 3 times. Then I tried my usual setup of adding scrambled books to a single chunk. And because the memory before I'd even added any scrambled books was already starting at 20 gigabyte, it worked. I got out of memory in the overworld, and then I got out of memory in the nether. I'm not actually going to show you it happening because it's going to take me hours and hours to fill all the books, but trust me, that's what happened. But again, I did this on a server on my PC, not the Apex hosting server, so I had to now try it again on there. So I tried again on Apex hosting. The advantage was that attempts now only took around 5 hours, not 12, but it still kept crashing and it still kept being unsuccessful. Probably because of the CPU only having access to 4 cores and not 32. The advantage was though, I was getting closer. I'd now come up with 2 setups for chunk regeneration, and both of them just did not work on an Apex hosting server. So instead of trying to tackle the 32 gigabytes of RAM issue, I decided to tackle the issue of Apex hosting and just see what works on Apex hosting servers in general. So I got a 2 gigabyte RAM server from Apex hosting, and my plan was to get out of memory on that, then do a chunk regen on 4 gig, 8 gig, 16, and just work my way up to 32 gigabyte to see where the issue was. But on the 2 gigabyte server, I made a crazy discovery. You see, I did my usual setup for 2 gigabytes, and here's what happened. Detected stop event, Java out of memory heap space. Yeah, on Apex hosting servers, the moment you trigger out of memory, the server automatically shuts down. So even if I'd successfully got out of memory on a 32 gigabyte server on Apex hosting without it crashing, the server would still have automatically stopped itself, meaning my setup wouldn't work. So that's it. It's impossible to trigger chunk regeneration using out of memory on an Apex hosting server. Game over. I'd come so close, but ultimately, I'd failed. But I wasn't gonna give up. I was closer than I'd ever been, so I literally came up with an entire new setup that would work specifically on Apex hosting servers. What a journey this has been. Basically, it would be a 2-player setup. So in the nether, I'd have all of these chunks filled with books, and there would be books that are all the same character. And this is exactly what me and Recrap did. We made all the books, we filled the barrels in chunks with the books, and this filled the memory up. And these would be chunk loaded with ender pearls so that they'd be tied to the player and would only load in when the player logged on. And if you're wondering how I managed to get water in the nether, because it's impossible, I just used a command, okay? This was for testing purposes, it didn't need to be survival friendly. I showed a nether stasis chamber in the actual video, so that's what I used for the final design, but yeah, water was fine for testing. I could probably have come up with a 1-player setup if I wanted to, but I felt like I didn't need to. This was just easier, and I knew it worked, and I had teammates. But yeah, back on the main account, I'd fill up the chunk I want to regen with a bunch of scramble books, and I'd get about 300 to 400 megabytes worth of that on a 2 gigabyte server. As you can see from the log, it's now got 332 million bytes, which is around 300 megabytes. And so at that point, I join with the alt that has all of the nether chunks loaded through ender pearls. Yes, my alt is called Big SP737 fan, get over it. But yeah, as you can see straight away, the memory jumps up to max. And in the console, we get detected stop event, Java out of memory, Java heap space. It starts to try and save the chunk that it wants to regen. It's trying to compress it because all the books are scrambled and different. And once again, it gets stop event, so it gets interrupted. And it basically just causes it to not be able to save that chunk. And for whatever reason, the memory has to be spiked up by chunks in a different dimension. That's kind of how this works. You need 2 dimensions to do chunk regeneration. And so then with this setup, we start the server back up. And when I reconnect, you'll see that with 100% consistency, I get a chunk regeneration. Or at least it's a very high percent. Maybe not every single time. But if it fails, you should just basically add more books and then get the alt to log in again. And eventually it will work. And as you can see from the console, we got the whole fail to read chunk and then fail to load chunk that shows that a regeneration of a chunk will occur. My goodness, I knew I was close. Like, I'd found a third setup that worked on Apex hosting. So now it was time to take on the dreaded 32 gigabyte server again. And it kept crashing, unfortunately. Again and again and again, crash after crash. I just couldn't get it to trigger out of memory before it crashed. But slowly but surely, I kept fine-tuning the setup. I made it so that I would have an exact amount of barrels with scrambled books. I can't open and show you because it'll literally kick me from the server like this. And I also spread the books out so that they would cover over 40 chunks so that Minecraft would load them incrementally instead of loading 1 or 2 big chunks all at once. And with a bit of experimenting and a bit of trial and error, I eventually got a fine-tuned setup that worked. And this was my reaction. Has this worked? Please. Please. It's done it! It's gone! The chunk has regenerated! Okay, now I've just got to do it on Lifesteal. I actually can't believe, finally! I didn't think it was possible. I really did not think it was possible. But now I've done it once, it's proven that it is possible, no matter what. Yep, 4 months of painstaking failure after failure all led to that. I was so glad it finally worked. I then continued to test the setup, tweak it even more just to get it as consistent as I possibly could. And was it worth it? Well, this was mine and Recrap's reaction when we did it on Lifesteal, so yes. Yes, it was. Are you ready?
Oh my
Feast
god!
your eyes on that!
It's me!
Look at
oh
this!
my gosh!
It's fully
This
intact.
is insane!
Right.
Wow!